When Breath Becomes Air, by Paul Kalanithi. Introduction. Imagine, for a moment, that you are at the absolute peak of your life. For 10 grueling years, you've worked harder than anyone you know, sacrificing sleep, relationships, and comfort to climb to the top of one of the most demanding professions on earth. You are a chief resident in neurosurgery at Stanford University. Your hands are skilled enough to operate on the human brain, the very seat of consciousness. Prestigious universities are calling, offering you dream jobs and millions of dollars to fund your research. You can see the future you've earned stretching out before you like a promised land, a beautiful life with the woman you love, a family, a legacy. Now, imagine you are looking at a CT scan. You've seen hundreds of them before. The images show a body riddled with cancer. The lungs are matted with tumors, the spine is deformed, the liver is being destroyed. You know, with the cold certainty of an expert, that the person whose body is displayed on that screen is facing the end. And then comes the gut-wrenching realization. The name on the scan is your own. This isn't a movie script. This was the reality for Drive. Paul Kalanithi. At just 36 years old, the neurosurgeon who spent his life treating the dying became a patient dying. His memoir, When Breath Becomes Air, is the story of that journey. It became an instant #1 New York Times bestseller after it was published, tragically, after his death. It has sold millions of copies and has been translated into more than 40 languages, touching the hearts of people all over the world. This isn't just a book about dying. It's a book about living. It asks a question that haunts every single one of us, whether we admit it or not. What makes life worth living in the face of death? By the end of our time together today, you will not only understand Paul's profound answer to that question, but you will also have a new framework for thinking about your own life, your own purpose, and the precious, fleeting time you have. This is a story about the intersection of science and soul, and it is one of the most powerful you will ever encounter. Book summary. Our story begins not in a sterile hospital room, but under the vast, sun-bleached skies of Kingman, Arizona, a small desert town where a young Paul Kalanithi was absolutely certain of one thing: he would never become a doctor. For him, medicine was the absence of a father, a brilliant cardiologist who left for work before dawn and returned long after dark. Paul saw the price of that life, and he decided it was far too high. Instead, he found his closest friends in the pages of books. His mother, an immigrant from India, was determined that her children would not be held back by the underfunded local schools. She handed her sons a college prep reading list, and Paul devoured it. He wrestled with George Orwell, debated with Camus, and found a nascent moral philosophy in Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. Literature wasn't just an escape, it was his first attempt to understand the human mind and what gives a life meaning. This passion led him to Stanford University, where he pursued degrees in both English literature and human biology. He was trying to build a bridge between two worlds: the world of the soul, explored through stories and poetry, and the world of the brain, explained by neurons and biology. He wanted to understand the machinery that allows us to love, to hope, to create meaning. But he felt a growing sense of dissatisfaction. The purely academic world, he realized, felt dry and disconnected from the messy reality of human life. He believed moral speculation was puny compared to moral action. One autumn afternoon, walking across campus, an idea struck him with the force of a revelation. He needed to stop reading about life and death and experience them firsthand. He needed to be in the room where the ultimate questions were being asked. He realized that the one place where biology, philosophy, and morality truly intersected was at the patient's bedside. He decided to become a doctor. Medical school at Yale was a profound shock to the system. Paul's first encounter with the reality of his new path was in the anatomy lab. There, laid out on a cold steel table, was a human body, a donor, they were called. That first cut with a scalpel, he writes, is a trespass on the sacrosanct. It's an act that forever changes you. Over the next 4 months, he and his classmates would methodically dissect this person, reducing them from a human being to a collection of tissues, organs, and nerves. The experience was a stark lesson in the necessary callousness of medicine. To heal, a doctor must sometimes objectify the body, seeing it as a machine to be fixed. But Paul never lost the sense that he was treading on holy ground. He was haunted by the knowledge that this body once held a life, a story, a family. In the stomach of his donor, he found 2 undigested morphine pills, a silent testament to a life that ended in pain. This tension, between the clinical and the human, the scientific and the sacred, would define his journey. He witnessed his first birth on the same day he witnessed his first death. He was on the obstetrics rotation when a mother came in with premature twins, born at just 23 weeks. They were tiny, fragile creatures, more like sketches of babies than babies themselves. They both died within a day. Just hours later, Paul helped deliver a healthy, plump baby, and he was the one to carry the joyous news to the waiting family. In that moment, he felt the full, dizzying spectrum of his new calling. One moment an ambassador of life, the next an envoy of death. He was drawn to the most demanding specialty of all, neurosurgery. It was, for him, the crucible of identity. Every operation on the brain is a manipulation of the self. A few millimeters in the wrong direction could alter a person's ability to speak, to feel, to love, to be who they are. Neurosurgeons, he saw, didn't just treat diseases, they shepherded patients and their families through the most profound questions a human can face. What kind of life is worth living? Would you trade your ability to speak for a few more months of life? How much suffering is too much? Here, finally, was the direct experience he had been seeking. Residency at Stanford was a 7-year trial by fire. He worked over 100 hours a week, fueled by energy drinks and an iron will. The days were long, but the years were short. He learned to be fast and precise, knowing that a single millimeter could be the difference between a life saved and a life ruined. He saw the full spectrum of human tragedy: car accidents, gunshot wounds, brain tumors, suicides. He describes one day running to the trauma bay to treat a young man from a motorcycle accident, his ice cream sandwich tucked behind a computer. The young man died on the table after 30 minutes of frantic effort. As the grieving family was brought in, Paul slipped back into the room, ghost-like, to retrieve his melting snack. It was a moment of horrifying, honest clarity. He had become inured to suffering. The fiery light of these life and death moments was so bright it was blinding him. He feared he was becoming the kind of doctor who saw only the disease, not the person. He resolved to change. He realized that technical excellence was a moral requirement, but it wasn't enough. When the scalpel can do no more, a surgeon's only tool is words. His highest ideal became not just saving lives, because everyone dies eventually, but guiding a patient or family to an understanding of their new reality. He learned to sit with them in their darkest moments, not as an all-powerful surgeon, but as a human guide, forging a covenant to walk with them through their suffering. This path was incredibly costly. He tells the devastating story of his friend and fellow resident, Jeff, who, after a patient died from a complication, climbed to the roof of a building and jumped. It was a brutal reminder of the crushing weight of mortal responsibility they had all chosen to bear. Death, Paul knew, always wins. The secret was to know that the deck is stacked against you, that you will lose, and yet still struggle to win for your patients. You can't reach perfection, but you can believe in an asymptote toward which you are ceaselessly striving. And then, just as he was about to reach that asymptote, just as he was about to graduate and begin the life he had fought so hard for, the world turned upside down. He was 36 years old, in his final year of residency. He had been experiencing severe back pain and unexplained weight loss. For months, he and his wife, Lucy, also a doctor, had suspected the worst but refused to even speak the word aloud. One day, he found himself not in a surgeon's scrubs but in a patient's gown, looking at his own CT scan on a hospital computer. The lungs were filled with innumerable tumors. The spine was deformed. A full lobe of the liver was obliterated. Cancer, widely disseminated. The diagnosis was obvious. In an instant, the identity he had spent his entire adult life building, drive. Kalanithi, the brilliant neurosurgeon, evaporated. The future he had so carefully planned was gone. He was no longer the shepherd, he was now the lost sheep. He writes that severe illness isn't life-altering, it's life-shattering. It felt like someone had firebombed the path forward. His new guide on this terrifying, unknown path was his oncologist, a compassionate but firm doctor named Emma Hayward. In their first meeting, Paul, ever the scientist, asked to see the Kaplan-Meier survival curves, the cold, hard statistics that would tell him how much time he had left. Emma's response was swift and absolute. "No," she said. "Absolutely not." Paul was stunned. This was how doctors understood prognosis. But Emma understood something deeper. She knew that statistics can't answer the existential questions Paul was now facing. Getting too deeply into the numbers, she knew, is like trying to quench a thirst with salty water. The angst of facing mortality has no remedy in probability. Instead, she asked him a different question, one that would reorient his entire world. "What's most important to you?" She told him they could talk about getting him back to work, back to surgery, if that was what he wanted. The idea seemed ludicrous. How could he operate again? But a seed had been planted. Emma's focus was not on his dying, but on his living. She was not just treating his cancer, she was protecting his ability to forge a new identity. The news, however, got better before it got worse. Tests revealed his cancer had a specific genetic mutation, making it treatable with a targeted therapy pill called Tarceva. It wasn't a cure, but it was a reprieve. The tumors began to shrink. The searing pain in his back began to subside. He started to regain his strength. And with that physical recovery came a flicker of hope. He began to realize that coming into such close contact with his own mortality had changed both nothing and everything. Before his diagnosis, he knew that someday he would die, but he didn't know when. After the diagnosis, he still knew that someday he would die, but he didn't know when. The difference was that now, he knew it acutely. The fog began to clear, and Paul and Lucy faced a decision that had become painfully urgent. Should they have a child? They had always wanted a family, but what would it mean to bring a new life into the world as his own was fading? Lucy worried that saying goodbye to a child would make his death even more painful. Paul's response was beautiful and profound. "Wouldn't it be great if it did?" he said. They both believed that a life of meaning wasn't about avoiding suffering. They decided to move forward, to carry on living instead of dying. As his strength returned, Paul made another momentous decision. He would return to the operating room. He would push himself to reclaim the identity that had been stolen from him. Because he could. Because that's who he was. Because, as he put it, even if I'm dying, until I actually die, I am still living. The return was brutal. His first day back, he nearly fainted in the middle of a surgery. His body was a wreck, but his mind and hands were still sharp. Day by day, he pushed through the pain, the nausea, and the profound fatigue. The visceral joy he once found in operating was gone, replaced by an iron will to simply endure. But in reconnecting with his patients, in taking up that sacred responsibility once more, he found meaning again. He was soon operating at a nearly full load, calling the shots, earning the respect of his colleagues all over again. For a while, it seemed like a victory. He had stared into the abyss and walked away. He started looking for jobs again. A top university in Wisconsin offered him his dream position. But during his visit there, standing in front of the hospital and looking out over a frozen lake, he was hit with a crushing realization. This life was a fantasy. If his cancer relapsed, Lucy would be isolated, caring for a dying husband and a new child, far from their family and friends. As desperately as he wanted to feel triumphant, he felt the claws of the crab holding him back. He had to let go of the life he had planned. He had to forge a new one. And he did. His daughter, Elizabeth Acadia, whom they called Katie, was born on the 4th of July. Holding her for the first time, he felt the possibilities of life emanating before him. He saw not an empty wasteland, but a blank page. But the cancer was relentless. Just a few months after Katie's birth, a scan revealed a new, large tumor in his right lung. The first-line therapy had failed. He started chemotherapy, a far more brutal treatment. The side effects were devastating. A deep, bone-wearying fatigue set in. Food, once a source of great pleasure, tasted like salt. He was too tired to read, too weak to work. The cycles of treatment became a blur of nausea and pain. His life, once so expansive, had shrunk to the four walls of his home. During one particularly bad episode, he was hospitalized, severely dehydrated, his kidneys failing. He slipped in and out of consciousness for over a week. But he survived. He emerged from the hospital a shadow of his former self, 40 pounds lighter, his body withered, but his mind still clear. In his final months, he poured what little energy he had left into one singular focus: writing this book. He knew his time was short, and he had something important to say. He wrote in his armchair, wrapped in a fleece blanket. He drafted paragraphs in his oncologist's waiting room. He carried his laptop everywhere. When his fingertips developed painful fissures from the chemotherapy, he wore special gloves so he could still use the keyboard. In early March of 2015, his health declined rapidly. New tumors appeared in his brain. His breathing became a struggle. On his last Sunday, he found himself back in the intensive care unit, the roar of a breathing machine keeping him alive. He knew, as a doctor, what the ominous test results meant. The only remaining option was intubation, being put on a ventilator, a life he may never be able to leave. Through the night, he discussed the choice with his doctors and his family. But the final decision was his. The next morning, he looked at Lucy, his eyes clear and steady, and said 3 simple words: "I'm ready." He was ready to let go. The machine was turned off. Morphine was started. His family gathered around him. With his wife Lucy in the hospital bed beside him, holding him, and his 8-month-old daughter Katie nestled in his arms, Paul Kalanithi took his last breath. His final message, the one that concludes his book, is not for us. It is for his daughter. He knew she would have little or no memory of him, so he left her these words to carry with her. He wrote, "When you come to one of the many moments in life where you must give an account of yourself, provide a ledger of what you have been, and done, and meant to the world, do not, I pray, discount that you filled a dying man's days with a sated joy, a joy unknown to me in all my prior years, a joy that does not hunger for more and more but rests, satisfied. In this time, right now, that is an enormous thing." Commentary. What Paul Kalanithi left behind in When Breath Becomes Air is more than just a memoir. It's a meditation on what it means to live a life of purpose when the horizon suddenly collapses. In a world that often encourages us to avoid thinking about death, Paul's story is a courageous and necessary confrontation with our own mortality. The most powerful lesson, I believe, is his evolving understanding of what it means to be a doctor, and by extension, what it means to be a compassionate human being. He starts his journey believing the goal is to conquer disease, to win the battle against death. But through his own suffering, he comes to a much more profound realization. The physician's true duty is not to stave off death or return patients to their old lives. It is to take into our arms a patient and family whose lives have disintegrated and work until they can stand back up and face their own existence. This is a lesson that extends far beyond the walls of a hospital. In our own lives, when we encounter friends or family in crisis, our instinct is often to fix their problem. Paul teaches us that sometimes, the most powerful thing we can do is simply to be present, to bear witness to their struggle, and to help them find the strength to face it themselves. His story also offers a powerful guide for navigating uncertainty. After his diagnosis, he is trapped between two futures. If he has 10 years, he'll be a surgeon. If he has 2, he'll be a writer. His oncologist, Emma, wisely refuses to give him a number, forcing him to live in the present and define his life not by its length, but by its depth. This is a challenge we all face. We create 5-year plans and 10-year goals, assuming we have an infinite runway. Paul's journey reminds us that the future is never guaranteed. The only real moment we have is now, and the most important question is not what will I do, but who will I be? So, how can we apply these profound lessons to our own lives, right now? First, don't wait for a crisis to define your values. Paul was forced to ask himself what made his life meaningful. We have the gift of asking that question in the absence of tragedy. Take a few minutes today and think about it. If you had to distill your life down to its most important elements, what would they be? Is it your relationships? Your work? Your creativity? Your faith? Knowing the answer to that question provides an anchor in the inevitable storms of life. Second, rethink your relationship with time. We often live as if we are preparing for a future that will one day arrive. We delay joy, defer our passions, and tell ourselves someday. Paul's story teaches us that the future is an idea, not a promise. This doesn't mean we should live recklessly. It means we should live intentionally. Find a way to integrate what is most important to you into your life today, not someday. Finally, embrace the role of the guide. Paul learned that his most sacred duty was to be a guide for others in their darkest hours. Look for opportunities in your own life to do the same. It doesn't require grand gestures. It can be as simple as listening without judgment to a friend who is struggling, offering comfort instead of solutions, and reminding them that they are not alone. That was the book summary of When Breath Becomes Air by Paul Kalanithi. We've touched on the major moments and ideas today, but I have to be honest with you. A summary is like looking at a photograph of a magnificent landscape. You can see the shape of the mountains and the color of the sky, but you can't feel the wind on your face or hear the sound of the birds. The true power of this book is in the experience of reading it yourself, in the quiet moments when Paul's raw honesty and beautiful prose connect with something deep inside you. This summary is here to help you decide if this journey is one you want to take. If anything we've talked about today has struck a chord, I encourage you to pick up a copy. It's more than a book, it's an unforgettable encounter with what it means to be human. The link is in the description. Also, if you found this journey valuable, please take a moment to click that subscribe button. That way, you won't miss our next exploration into another one of the transformative books that shape the minds of the world's most successful and thoughtful people. Let's continue to learn and grow, together.